The Galactic Empire had stood unchallenged for centuries, its banners spread across thousands of worlds, its fleets blotting out the stars wherever they arrived. To most species of the galaxy, the Empire was inevitable, unstoppable, and absolute. Those who opposed it were ground into dust, their civilizations remembered only as footnotes in imperial history. Yet for the first time in generations, there was a name spoken with unease among its admirals and governors, a name that did not belong to a fleet or a nation, but to a single human commander. Elara Veyr, known to allies and enemies alike as the Woman General, had carved a legend that the Empire could not erase. Elara's rise was born from defiance. Humanity, relegated to the fringes of galactic affairs, had no grand fleets or ancient empires. They were seen as reckless deathworlders, stubborn and unsophisticated compared to the galaxy's ancient races. But Elara had transformed that image into a weapon, with a mind as sharp as any blade. She united scattered human colonies and forged a coalition of desperate worlds that had suffered under imperial oppression. She knew that direct war was impossible against an empire that spanned so much of the stars. Instead, she fought wars of maneuver, ambushes, and brutal efficiency, forcing the empire to bleed for every inch of territory. Her campaigns became lessons in asymmetry. With a handful of ships, she destroyed imperial convoys. With fleets smaller by orders of magnitude, she shattered armadas by luring them into nebulae, asteroid fields, and gravity wells that turned technological superiority into weakness. Stories spread of how she had defeated 3 grand admirals in succession, leaving their fleets wrecked and their names disgraced. In backwater cantinas, smugglers swore that she could read the mind of the enemy before they acted. To common soldiers of the Empire, she was a phantom, an executioner cloaked in human flesh. What made her most dangerous was not only her tactics, but her refusal to yield. Where other species sued for peace or compromise, she never bent. For her, survival meant resistance, and she passed that creed into every soldier under her command. Her enemies began to whisper that humanity was different from the others, that they would fight long after hope was lost, that they found strength in desperation, that they would win by refusing to acknowledge defeat as real. For the first time in centuries, the Empire faced not just opposition, but fear. The High Command could not tolerate her. To allow one human general to continually humiliate them was unthinkable, a stain upon their image of supremacy. So they began to weave a net, a trap so vast and deliberate that even Elara Veyr could not escape. Intelligence officers bribed and threatened her allies, promising worlds of freedom in exchange for betrayal. Vast resources were poured into constructing new technologies designed to counter human unpredictability. Fleets that relied not on a single admiral's decision, but on predictive algorithms capable of simulating millions of possible outcomes. For months, the Empire allowed Elara to win small victories. Each one drawed her further into the center of their design. When the trap was sprung, it came with the force of a collapsing star. In the Trassel Expanse, Elara led her fleet to strike what she believed was an exposed imperial supply hub. Instead, she found herself surrounded by more than 500 capital ships, their formations flawless, their firepower enough to erase entire continents. Her scouts reported that retreat paths were blocked, communication channels jammed, hyperspace lanes collapsed by interdiction fields. Even for her brilliance, there was no path to escape. Still, she did not falter. With her characteristic calm, she reorganized her fleet, every ship positioned to maximize survival. She gave orders not for surrender, but for defiance. Her smaller vessels darted like wolves among the larger imperial behemoths, crippling engines, detonating reactors, turning the void into chaos. Her soldiers fought with the knowledge that survival was impossible, yet still they pressed forward, each ship making the Empire pay dearly for every kill. Reports from the battle would later claim that for hours, the Imperial fleet seemed to falter, that their formations crumbled before the madness of human tactics, and that only by sheer weight of numbers did the trap finally close. Her flagship was surrounded, battered on all sides. Imperial broadcasts demanded her surrender, but she only answered with silence and continued volleys of fire. Even when her engines were torn apart and her shields collapsed, she stood on the command deck, issuing orders as though victory were still possible. It was said that her final words to her crew were not commands, but a vow that humanity would never forgive and never forget. The Empire captured her alive, a prize too great to waste in a mere explosion. They paraded her in chains across the capital, a spectacle designed to erase the terror of her legend. Crowds of aliens were forced to cheer as she was displayed. A woman stripped her armor, but not of her dignity. Her eyes, cold and unyielding, seemed to pierce through the masses, as though she saw beyond them, as though she knew something they did not. When the execution was broadcast across the galaxy, her final look into the camera carried no fear, only defiance. Then the Empire declared her dead, her ashes scattered into the void as a warning to all who might resist. For the galaxy, it was the end of a nightmare. The Human General was no more. Imperial citizens toasted their victory, and admirals spoke confidently again of unbroken supremacy. Her name was condemned to history books, her memory treated as a cautionary tale of what happens to those who oppose the might of the Empire. They believed her legend would fade with time, buried beneath the weight of propaganda. Yet whispers remained. Among soldiers who had faced her fleets and lived, there was no relief, only unease. Among conquered peoples, her death was not seen as defeat, but as martyrdom. And in the hidden places of the galaxy, smuggler dens, pirate outposts, resistance hideouts, there were murmurs of something more. The Empire celebrated, but humanity knew better. The line of Elara Veyr had not ended with her execution. Few knew the truth, but those who did spoke it in hushed tones. She had children, hidden from the Empire, each bearing her blood, her will, and her fire. The Empire thought it had killed a general. What they had done, instead, was ignite a legacy. For humanity, vengeance was not bound by a single life. It was carried forward in those who remained, waiting for the day when the debt would be repaid in fire and blood. Elara's death was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of theirs. After the execution of Elara Veyr, the Empire turned its gaze elsewhere, convinced that humanity's threat had ended with the destruction of their most dangerous commander. But history has always shown that empires fall not from the strength of their enemies, but from what they fail to see. And what the Galactic Empire failed to see were the 3 children Elara had hidden away, each raised in secrecy, each forged by the knowledge that their mother had died fighting not only for survival, but for a future they were destined to claim. The galaxy had cheered the execution, but in its shadow, a legacy awakened. The eldest was raised among scattered remnants of humanity's fleets, learning the discipline of command from officers who had once served under Elara herself. Unlike his mother, he carried no illusions of honor in war. For him, strategy was not a path to glory, but a calculus of survival and annihilation. His mind was colder, sharper, unsoftened by compromise. Where Elara sought to inspire, he sought to break. He began to gather strength in silence, uniting pirate lords, disillusioned mercenaries, and even alien clans long oppressed by the Empire. Through persuasion, manipulation, and fear, he built a network of forces that answered only to him. They whispered his name in fear, for he was not just a commander, he was a strategist who thought in centuries, not battles. He believed the Empire's death must not come quickly, but slowly, cut apart until its vast body collapsed under its own weight. The second child chose a different path. Cast into the brutal crucibles of Death World colonies, they became not a commander of fleets, but a warrior of unmatched ferocity. Their strength was born not of numbers or technology, but of sheer will. Trained in every form of combat, from blade to rifle to bare hands, the warrior lived the front lines. Tales of their boarding actions spread like wildfire. An unstoppable figure leading squads in the heart of Imperial cruisers, tearing through armored soldiers with the relentlessness of a predator that refused to die. To their enemies, they became a nightmare-given flesh, called the Deathworlder Blade. But unlike those who sought glory, their every act was driven by one memory alone: the sight of their mother's execution broadcast across the stars. To fight was not to win battles. It was to carve vengeance into every enemy they struck down. The youngest was the quietest, the one dismissed even by those who knew of their bloodline. Yet it was this child who became the most dangerous. Disappearing into the underworld of the galaxy, they learned the arts of sabotage, infiltration, and silent murder. Where the strategist commanded armies and the warrior commanded terror, the The youngest commanded shadows. They could slip into Imperial strongholds unseen, dismantle fleets without firing a shot, and turn entire sectors into chaos by severing the veins of communication and supply. The Empire began to suffer accidents, unexplained failures, assassinations of key governors and admirals. Each time, suspicion grew, paranoia spread, and still the Empire could not prove a hand behind it. Those few who caught a glimpse spoke of human eyes in the dark, eyes that did not blink, eyes that promised death. They became known as the Shadow, a whisper that no propaganda could silence. For years, the three walked separate paths, each carving their legend in different corners of the galaxy. The eldest manipulated wars between minor factions, watching as the Empire stretched itself thinner. The warrior broke fortress worlds, leaving behind smoking ruins as monuments of defiance. The Shadow hollowed out the Empire from within, sowing fear and confusion where once there had been order. And all the while, the Empire dismissed these as isolated insurgencies, failing to see the pattern. It was arrogance born from centuries of dominance, the belief that no power could truly rival them. It was that arrogance which allowed the children to prepare. When at last they reunited, it was not with the softness of family, but with the hardness of resolve. The strategists arrived with fleets flying no banner, united only in their hatred of the Empire. The warrior came with legions hardened by endless battles, soldiers who followed because they had seen what true ferocity meant. The Shadow brought no armies, but information, secrets, and the power to break the Empire's spine from within. In a dark chamber, far from the prying eyes of the galaxy, the three swore an oath, not of peace, not of rebuilding, but of vengeance. They would not stop until the Empire that murdered their mother was erased. And unlike Elara, they had no intention of giving their enemies a chance for survival. The oath was not made in desperation. It was made with certainty. The galaxy would learn that the blood of the woman general had not ended with her death. It had multiplied, divided into 3 minds, 3 strengths, 3 weapons honed for war. Each child embodied a facet of humanity that terrified the other species. The mind that could not be predicted, the will that could not be broken, and the darkness that could not be seen until it struck. United, they were more than their mother's legacy. They were the inevitable consequence of her death. The first cracks in the Empire's facade appeared soon after. Coordinated strikes emerged across dozens of sectors. Convoys disappeared without trace, their escorts shattered. Entire garrisons woke to find their commanders dead in their chambers. In remote star systems, Imperial fleets found themselves ambushed by enemies who seemed to know their every maneuver before it happened. At first, the High Command dismissed them as chance, as scattered rebellions no different from those they had crushed before. But the pattern became undeniable. There was intelligence guiding the assaults, strength leading the battles, and shadows cutting away the Empire's roots. Rumors spread like fire. Rumors of 3 humans who had returned to finish what Elara Veyr had begun. The galaxy trembled as the whispers grew louder. In every cantina, in every market, in every barracks, soldiers and civilians alike spoke of the general's children. To those who suffered under the Empire's boot, they became symbols of hope. To those within the Empire's ranks, they became omens of doom. And as fear spread, so too did the reach of the siblings, weaving their vengeance tighter around the throats of their enemies. The Empire had celebrated the death of 1 human general. It had not yet realized the terror of 3.